Thank you, colleagues. We'll move on to the next item of business, which is topical questions. Our first question is from Ian Gray.
I ask the Scottish Government, in light of press reports of consideration being given to partially reopening schools in mid-May, what plans it has to do so in Scotland.
Minister Marie Todd.
Schools will remain closed until further notice due to the impact of COVID-19. However, this is under constant review. Any decision we take to reopen our schools will be guided by the science and will include engagement with our local government partners. As the First Minister has stated, we hope to be able to provide an update to the public in the coming week on the principles of our exit strategy. In the meantime, new guidance was published yesterday to support the home learning of children and young people in the new term.
Ian Gray.
Well, I welcome the Minister and the Government's caution. That's the right approach, but we could do with some more clarity. The Education Secretary this morning on radio suggested that schools would stay closed at least until the summer break. But we do need to plan how we reopen schools, even if we do not know when we will be able to. We need to know what must be in place to allow reopening, how we phase that reopening, how we can ensure the safety of pupils, teachers and support staff, and how we can recover at least some of the lost educational ground. So can the Minister tell us what plans are being made now on how schools can return?
Marie Todd.
The decision to close schools across Scotland was based on scientific advice that doing so would help to slow the spread of coronavirus. And ahead of that decision being taken, Scottish ministers consulted with the Chief Medical Officer, with Scientific Advisory Group on Emergencies, and engaged with COSLA, Education Scotland, ADIS, Solace and the teaching unions. Whatever decision we take going forward will also be based on public health advice and in dialogue with all of those partners. The Deputy First Minister will be having discussions with many of those partners later this week about the issues which need to be considered when managing the eventual reopening of schools. And the First Minister, as has been stated many times this week, will give more detail later on in the week about how we might lift the restrictions that we currently face. But schools are currently closed. They will remain closed for the foreseeable future, and the Scottish Government will not risk undermining the effectiveness of the steps that we have taken in halting the spread of the virus.
Ian Gray.
Well, the First Minister promised us a grown-up conversation about planning how lockdown will be raised. It would be helpful, I think, if some of those discussions were rather more public than the Minister is suggesting. This week also we saw how wide the attainment gap remains. Pupils from prosperous areas are more likely to achieve 5 hires than those in deprived communities are likely to get just 1. And every day of school closure will only widen that gap. So when schools do return, what new and additional efforts will the Scottish Government take to try and repair that damage?
Marie Todd.
So let me be absolutely clear that the Government closing the poverty-related attainment gap is the defining mission of this Government. And our commitment to that remains consistent throughout and beyond this challenging period. So we're not waiting just until the schools open. We are currently working very hard on that particular issue. Now more than ever, there is a need for a strong focus on equity and excellence, and that is why we are continuing with our commitment to invest £182 million from the Attainment Scotland Fund in 2020-21. We've also provided local authorities with guidance on flexibility to redirect resources aimed at closing the attainment gap to help mitigate the impacts of school closures on our most disadvantaged families. And there will be as much of that as we can possibly manage, because we recognise the disadvantage for many families who are in a very difficult learning situation at the moment, but we are providing as much support as we possibly can to both teachers, to families and to individual children themselves.
Kenneth Gibson, to be followed by James. Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Minister, Sweden has never closed its primary schools and Denmark has begun reopening them. The physiology of young children makes them less likely to catch COVID-19 or spread it to adults if they do. according to research by the University of Munich, among others, due to the underexpression of angiotensin-converting enzyme 2 regulators in their lungs. Is the reopening of nursery and primary schools therefore likely to be scheduled before the reopening of secondary schools where the risk is greater?
Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Well, I never expected to go back to my pharmacy physiology days and be thinking about angiotensin receptors when answering a question in the chamber. Let me be absolutely clear that the decision was taken to close schools with the best scientific advice that we have in Scotland, and the decision to reopen them will also be taken with that scientific advice. You're right, the physiology of children doesn't differ, but the school learning environment may well differ between countries. And in fact, there are an awful lot of adults in schools as well as children.
Jamie Green to be followed by Neil Findlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Given that the Deputy First Minister stated this morning that schools will not open until at least July of this year, can I ask, given that lockdown measures may ease before then, what specific criteria has already been applied by the Government which informed that decision today? And if it transpires that schools in Scotland remain closed but potentially open in other parts of the UK, will the Scottish Government be transparent with us and the wider public about the rationale behind any such divergence?
Minister.
So the Scottish Government will be very clear about the need for any changes in the school closure that we are facing at the moment. The Deputy First Minister this morning was absolutely clear that schools are closed for the foreseeable future, and that the decision to reopen schools will be taken with medical and scientific advice, and also in partnership with COSLA, with Education Scotland, ADIS, Solace and the teaching unions. The Deputy First Minister has planned meetings with those partners later in this week. There will be transparency around what sort of things need to be managed in order for us to safely reopen schools. And the First Minister will set out by the end of this week a plan for the country in terms of removing some of the restrictions that we currently face, what needs to happen for those restrictions to be lifted.
And Neil Findlay.
There's great concern that the attainment gap will increase during the closure, and that those in the most deprived communities will suffer the most, as they always do. What additional support, not previously announced support, what additional support will be put in to try and ensure that we close the attainment gap, particularly for those pupils?
Marie Todd.
So I mentioned in response to an earlier question, we are not waiting until the schools are back in to tackle that particular issue, and we've provided local authorities with flexibility to redirect resources which are aimed at closing the attainment gap right now to help to mitigate the effect of school closures on our most disadvantaged families. So that includes flexible use of the Attainment Scotland funding, pupil equity funding, Challenge Authority funding, schools programme funding and care experienced children and young people funding, all of which can play an important part in mitigating the impact of home learning arrangements that might prove more challenging for our most disadvantaged families to adapt to. There are already a number of examples of schools and local authorities deploying the additional funding flexibility to support disadvantaged learners, for example, through providing laptops and tablets to support digital learning at home, purchase and delivery of books and other learning material to children at home, and providing transport to enable some learners to attend local authority hubs, and supporting homeschool link workers to maintain regular contact with children. That's just a handful of examples of the current work that is currently going on.
Thank you. Question number 2, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government, with the school term resuming, whether it will provide an update on how it is ensuring equal access to learning, including for those with additional support needs and from disadvantaged backgrounds.
Minister Marie Todd.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On Monday, the 20th of April, the Scottish Government published comprehensive guidance to help support continuity for children and for young people's learning for the term ahead. The guidance is for pupils and parents and teachers and was prepared by the Scottish Government and Education Scotland with helpful advice and input from COSLA, Solace, ADIS and professional associations. It gives an overview of the measures which are in place and the steps being taken at a national and a local level to support children and young people in Scotland. We recognise that children and young people with additional support needs may be finding this particularly challenging, and that's why we've developed advice for parents and carers to enable them to support children and young people with additional support needs when learning at home. The advice will be published by the end of this week on the Parent Club Coronavirus Hub. We also recognise and value the efforts that colleagues across the country have made to support our most disadvantaged children. And as I said in answer to my previous questions, the Scottish Government has provided local authorities with flexibility to redirect resources aimed at closing the attainment gap to help mitigate the impacts of school closures on our most disadvantaged families.
Alice Cole-Hamilton.
Grateful for that answer. Can I remind the Chamber that I am married to a primary school teacher who is also working at the Key Worker childcare hubs. It was a heroic effort of our teachers and parents to get learning in place for the 10 days before Easter. But now we are entering a 10-week term with the very real possibility that remote learning may be required throughout. And we know how fast children develop and that attainment gaps can widen quickly without proper teaching. Some pupils will be feeling very keenly the loss of classroom structure and other support services. And one father has told me that there is limited material available online suitable for his daughter who needs one-to-one support, Macedon Sign Language and other provision. He requests for more from him and the rest of his family have yet to bear fruit. Will the Minister ensure that videos and other resources are available online to help children with moderate learning difficulties?
Minister Marito.
Absolutely. The families of vulnerable children, and including some children with additional support needs, do have access to childcare through local authority hubs, as you mentioned, and support and advice is being provided to the parents of children with additional support needs through the Scottish Government's Parent Club website and by a whole range of partner organisations, including Call Scotland, Dyslexia Scotland, The Reach and Inquire. So that constituent who you've mentioned should be able to find some support in some of those partner organisations, but obviously you're more than welcome to come back to us if your constituent is struggling to find the support that they require.
Alice Cole-Hamilton.
Of that answer also. A month ago, the Education Secretary told Parliament that vulnerable children would be supported, but explained he wasn't going to be prescriptive about who they were or what form that support would take. Can the Minister update the Chamber as to how many children have been identified by local authorities, how the system is responding to parents who don't engage or disagree with the needs assessment, and how she is ensuring that no child will fall through the cracks?
Minister Marito.
So, as you can imagine, there's a great deal of work going on in government to identify and to support and to reach those children that we would consider to be vulnerable. At the moment, though, because of the restrictions on every person in society in Scotland, as you might imagine, most families are not wanting their children to leave the home and go to a hub and be supported elsewhere outside of the family. Almost all families have responded to the current threat and the current situation with a sense of wanting to keep everyone safe at home. So we're looking at different ways of supporting families than we perhaps originally envisaged at the beginning of this pandemic response. One thing which has been remarkable has been seeing the flexible approach to free school meal provision. So free school meals, some are happening within the school building, some are being delivered from the school building to homes, some are being provided in terms of e-vouchers, some are being provided in terms of cash should the family live in a rural place where they're unable to use vouchers or tokens for certain supermarkets. It is remarkable the level of flexibility that our local authority partners have brought to these challenges, and about 140,000 children in Scotland are currently benefiting from free school meals.
Thank you very much. Jamie Halker-Johnson to be followed by Mark Ruskell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I've been contacted by teachers who are concerned that there are still young people in Scotland who don't have access to home broadband or laptops. So, taking on board what the Minister said, what can the Scottish Government do to make sure that they do going forward?
Minister.
This is an excellent question, and particularly as a Highland MSP, I have to commend Highland Council's decision a number of years ago to provide Chromebooks to the whole learning population in the Highlands, which at the time caused a great deal of controversy, but currently looks like an absolute masterstroke in the current situation. We've seen some great examples emerging across Scotland of how to tackle that particular challenge of children not having access to devices or not having access to broadband. Work's been undertaken through the Scottish Government, led by Aileen Campbell, through the Scottish Government's No One Left Behind project, with industry and with other partners to identify and to support digitally excluded households, and more support will follow this term, building on the positive feedback to date and taking account of the continuing priorities that teachers and practitioners identify.
Mark Ruskell.
Yesterday, the SQA published information on how it will award qualifications, including that its appeal service will be based on assessment evidence. However, there's a wide variety in the way prelims are taken across Scotland, and any appeals process based on this information must ensure that pupils are not unfairly penalised for a poor quality prelim paper or a mock exam taken earlier than their peers. Can the Minister clarify how these issues will be taken into account?
It's a little broad as a question, but Marie Todd, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Exceptional circumstances mean that the 2020 exam diet can't go ahead, and I think everyone has agreed that that is the case. It's very clear that the exam diet can't go ahead. The certification model that SQA is developing will allow the hard work of learners to be recognised and qualifications awarded. The teachers and lecturers are being asked to make important decisions about how learners have otherwise performed in the exams that they were, how learners might otherwise have performed in the exams that they are due to sit this year. And to ensure the integrity of the awards, it's right and important that the SQA will be able to check out and to validate the teacher and lecturer estimates. And that process is being designed to promote fairness. It is there to ensure that an A in one school is the same as an A in any other school, that a B in one school is the same as a B in any other school, and so on. So the process is being laid out and is as fair as we can possibly make it in the circumstances that we face.
Thank you. And question number 3, Miles Briggs.
So to ask the Scottish Government what steps are being taken to support young people's mental well-being during the COVID-19 outbreak.
Minister Claire Hockey.
We know that closing schools and placing restrictions on everyday life has been difficult for everyone, and in particular children and young people. We want guidance and help to be available for anyone who needs it. The unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic has meant that local authorities are rightly focusing on providing adequate and effective support for our most vulnerable young people. The provision of counsellors, as well as educational psychologists, are a key part of this support. We want to make sure that anyone who needs support can get access to appropriate services, and we are working to support mental health staff to maintain the integrity and quality of services across Scotland during the pandemic. CAMS services continue to support children and young people in need of specialist support, although there will be some adjustments in how that is delivered to accommodate COVID restrictions. Last week we launched a digital resource specifically to help children and young people learn about the healthy use of screens and social media. The Mind Your Time resource will support mental and physical health online, and this is especially important now and will continue to be in the future.
Miles Briggs.
Can I take this opportunity to pay tribute to the many third sector organisations across Scotland who are helping to support many people and their families at this time? We know that children's mental health waiting times in Scotland have doubled over the last decade, so we must act now to develop and support the support which will be needed as we come out of the COVID-19 and the lockdown. Can I specifically ask how many young people have been referred to CAMS services in Scotland during the lockdown? And what work have ministers undertaken to increase access to distress brief intervention services?
Minister.
I thank Miles Briggs for his question there, and I too pay tribute to the third sector organisations who before the pandemic and through this and after will help us to support mental health and well-being of the people of Scotland. I don't have those specific figures, but I am certainly happy to provide those to him. He asked there specifically about distress brief interventions. We have announced in the last week the expansion of DBI, which includes anyone over the age of 16 to right across the country, and we've expanded that from the 4 pilot sites, and I am really pleased that we have invested £1 million to roll that out nationally.
Miles Briggs.
Minister, for that answer, and I hope this information can be made public on a weekly basis going forward. During this time, it's important to provide resources to parents and guardians and to look to develop early support for young people experiencing raised anxiety. What plans do ministers have to consider opportunities for additional training for teachers in mental health support during this time? And what work is being undertaken to identify the most vulnerable children in our country at this moment, such as young carers?
Minister Clare Hockey.
So the Scottish Government is working with a range of partners to support children and families and to mitigate the impact of the outbreak and the necessary social distancing measures that we are seeing in education and the other vital services to support their health and well-being. We're committed to getting it right for every child, and we're supporting services to work together to support our most vulnerable children. As Miles Briggs will be aware, we have provided local authorities with access to mental health training for teachers, and I'm sure that that will be ongoing, and that as it's an online resource, that it will be something that will be added to over the coming weeks.